Hello, hello. How's it going, everybody? It's Gabriel and the fire. And like I have to introduce it. It's like starting the video, pointing the camera at the fire, but just in case you're wondering. And today I'm going to be filming part 8 of my education series. And that is a part about... instead of doing a workout today, I think I'm gonna do a video that's more speaking, and then save the workout video for later. Got it? Cool. Alright, so there's a lot of things obviously I want to say about education. That's why I'm making this series. One of the big things, I think, is just looking for yourself. So before I just get into all of this, I'm just going to say there's been some very influential teachers in my life. And not to discredit them, but they were always working within an educational system. And I've had a lot of great coaches, and I've written about that in my work on coaching, which you can find on my Facebook page. So... besides those kind of more institutionalized, I guess, instructors, there's some really good stuff out there on the internet. So I would say Richard Grove is a really solid resource. He's kind of like the guy who red-pilled me initially. I would also go with Socrates, John Locke. I'm a big fan of Jesus too, but Socrates, John Locke, and today we're going to be going into some Pleidian stuff too. It's a book called Bringers of the Dawn. It's some channeled work, and then Ra, the Law of One teachings. Those are just great, like, bedrock things to learn. So, you know, regardless of what you think of me or here, I think those are some, like, pretty credible sources. They've, you know, really stood the test of time. And there's, yeah, obviously more than that. So, you know, finding new material is always going to be part of education and part of that discovery process, that learning process. So, yeah, you know, don't think this is the end-all be-all, but, you know, doing my best out here. Not really my best, but this is just the beginning. So, okay, so Socrates said that many people thought Socrates was the smartest person in Greece. So, but Socrates refused that title. And he actually said instead that he was only smart because he understood the things that he was ignorant about. So a key to understanding your ignorance is being able to ask the right questions. So I would say throughout all of your education, always be asking the right... if you believe in Socrates, always be asking the right questions. Because that's going to lead you to the truth faster than using assumptions. So I would say there's a lot of important questions to ask when it comes to education. And there's a lot of questions individually that we might have before we want to pursue education. So it's not like any of the questions I'm going to say are going to be like the standard list of questions everyone should ask before they start their educational pursuits, or every teacher should lay out for their students. Because, yeah, one of the things John Locke said is that education should fit the student. And everybody has their own teaching style, their own learning style. And, yeah, you want that efficiency typically. So, you know, tailoring is a good idea. especially if you have the capacity to tailor, because not everybody has, tutors working for them. So I would say the first question you should ask is, why should I be educated? And I think the answer is because it will allow you to be independent, and that independence and liberty will give you a better quality of life, most likely. Not not a guarantee, but most people prefer to be free, assuming that they have some capacity to consume and aren't dependent on others for consumption. So if your goal in getting an education is to be independent, or it could be different than that. It could also be to be of service. It could be to repay some kind of debt that you owe someone or some group of people. But let's just say you want to be independent, you want to have a capacity to be of service as well, and potentially there will obviously be more considerations people will take into account, but just a normal person, they want to give back to their family, they want to be not a burden as they get older. So in that case, that person can get experience in independence by structuring their own learning, doing independent learning. And for that to happen, they have to know what are the important things to learn. And so you need to give a new student the ability, or at some point, you'll have to give them the ability to structure their own learning if you expect them to be independent in the future. At least that would be the most effective way. And the best way to do that is to teach them how to soundly use a line of questioning to evaluate possibilities, just like a philosopher would use. So that's obviously what I'm talking about, educational philosophy. And Socrates talked a lot about this, and the Socratic method is used in law, and it's based on Socrates' ability to question. So you can look into that if you'd like. So independence is also valuable because it gives you some time to relax. I would say we kind of live in a polarized society where we have dark and light, and if light is service to others and dark is greed and service to self, and that polarization exists, and it exists pretty strongly because we're in the days of Noah, I would say that there is a that there's a reason to prioritize independence, because society is kind of making strong attempts to remove independence from society. So what else we got here? Well, you also have to be able to remember what you're learning. So if you have a student with a poor memory, that's really an issue you have to address pretty much right away. I wouldn't say I'm great at teaching memory, but there's a book called Moonwalking with Einstein that could be helpful for that. So hopefully that's a good resource. Obviously in the future, if you want to be independent, you're going to have to remember what you learned, so that's important. And also, there is a chance in your educational pursuits you take a risk that limits or reduces your your independence. So there also is you have to be able to assess risk in your educational pursuits as well, so you do not become crippled, because you need to have a good vessel to learn, according to John Locke. And then if you pursue that too hard and have some bad karma and you make some Anyway, karma plays into risk a little bit, but that's a little too confusing for right now. But anyway, if you're pursuing a good vessel so you can be better educated, and then you get a concussion, that's obviously going to limit how much you can learn. So there's some risk assessment and some importance of memory that you also have to consider. So let's say you want to be independent, you want to be of service, then you're going to assess what is the most valuable things to learn, and you're going to do that with questions. So the first question would be, what lessons yield independence? Or what knowledge or skills will yield the highest likelihood of independence? Because there is that risk that things change, or that you'll take some course of action that has a risk that can potentially negatively impact your independence. So according to Socrates, he would say the best place to start with what you don't know, because if he thinks he's smart because he doesn't know things, the course towards independence would be evaluating first the unknown factors and then moving on to the known factors. So like an unknown factor would be like, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? So like if you are thinking you want to be independent and you're like, I'm going to start I'm going to buy a fishing boat in the Gulf Coast, one unknown factor would be the weather. And if you read in the Bible that there's going to be more and more weather issues in the end times, it might not be the best place to try and seek your independence. And then obviously, there's a million questions that could help you find your independence. For me personally, a big one is finance, because we live in this crazy world that's dominated by money, where people who do no work are completely independent. So I would say one of the things very few people understand, and we should all seek to understand better, is finance. But independence goes beyond just money, because you also need to have the physical vessel. So you should also ask questions like, how do I maintain my physical capacity to learn? And obviously there's like a bigger existential question of like, once I have that financial independence, what will I do with my time, because it's not just like structuring your education or your life for a brief period. Like people who win the lottery are also like miserable. So it's not just like getting the independence, it's also being able to handle that kind of burden that independence can be if you're not kind of ready for it. So even if independence is the goal, so that maybe you can be of service and you're not a burden, it's also a challenge. And so life is full of those kind of paradoxes of faith and difficulty that you kind of have to assess. So I would say one of the best things you can do is kind of learn about what other people have done with their lives. And so, people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And that's one of a major thing that we all don't know much about is, the history of the world and our planet and solar system and all that. So that's another great question to ask is, what was it like to live before now? What circumstances led to society today? And what kind of lifestyle habits have shaped the people who are the happiest and who have shaped the understandings also of those people, because those people might be happy, but also they chose the right thing in advance. And how did they do that? Did they have some foreknowledge of events, or did they just have the right understanding of how the world functions prior to setting out on their educational pursuits? So yeah, there's a million things to consider, and I would say history is the easiest one to be like, well, I'm not sure, so I'm going to look into history and then see what kind of a world I'm even living in. Like, how stable are things, or how much of a guarantee do I have about that the future is even going to exist? And then, what are the most dependable sources of information about the future? Because if you want independence, it's independence in the future. So a key thing we don't really understand is not just the past, but also the future. And once you start looking into that kind of ability to see the future, predict things, you can look at machine learning algorithms, you can look at Nate Silver, and then David Wilcock always talks about things like Project Looking Glass, time travel, and the Bible is a great example of prophecy. And it can also help people understand that you can't serve the money and God. So you might want education and independence so you can be of service, but if you want education for independence and for money, then you're going to inherently make more selfish and dark choices with your life, and that karma is going to make it more risky, and it's going to make you less happy in the long run as well. So that's that's a difficulty that we're all going to face. Anyway, there's some other key factors with education. So I think I might go into more depth about the Bible later, but that's a big point that I'm going to try to get into later is kind of why the Bible was such an important part of education. And it still is in some places. So throughout that process of asking questions and seeking the truth, so that you can find independence and find ways to be of service, you're going to face hardship, and that hardship is going to require discipline to overcome. So children do need discipline, but they don't need excessive amounts of punishment. And I think John Locke said, the children who are the most punished seldom make the best men. And I would agree. You really want to use positive reinforcement and make your feedback as little emotionally charged as you can, unless there's something really that can only be conveyed by saying it in a certain way. That hurts is a great example where the way you say it is going to be important, but you shouldn't get angry when you say it, as well. So you have to discipline children, but you can do just as much discipline without really being emotionally angry and without being super aggressive. And I would say when I discipline as a coach, typically I will endure the discipline with the person I'm disciplining if I can, because you also should be willing to, there should be some value to the discipline. It should be difficult, but it should have some learning in it as well, so that that way you maximize how much you're getting, how much learning is happening. And so if you're facing hardship and fatigue as a student, I would just say that's a challenge, and that's kind of why you incarnate, is to face those conditions. So it's religion might tie into it a little bit, where someone with no faith who faces really difficult circumstances will have a harder time than someone who really wants to serve others or serve God or whatever the motivation is. But inherently, a selfish pursuit, I think, is easier to give up in the face of hardship. And people who are teaching for selfish reasons will also have less desire to be good teachers and to discipline well. So there's also one other dude I forgot to mention earlier. His name's Albert Bandura, I believe. He's a professor and he's very good at what he does. He has a book called Self-Efficacy, and in that book he talks extensively about models of good behavior and how people learn from watching just as well as they learn from doing. So I would highly recommend, and John Locke echoes that, and he says children mostly learn from seeing things done well. So, as much as the stick or the carrot are effective ways, so is the, just simply walking the walk, Don't just talk the talk. That's easier said than done. That's like 100% the point, is it's supposed to be hard to walk the walk. Talking's definitely easier. There's just real no limit to how much you can talk, and you do have capacity limits on how well you can walk the walk. So you're not going to be able to demonstrate everything in one day. You could probably say a lot in one day, but it's not going to really sink in until you see it taken out. All right, I'm going to check the time really quick. Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up. So, Albert Bandura, he's a solid dude. Quickly, kids will change, and don't worry too much about something age will cure. That's John Locke. The Pleidians said, and bringers the dawn, children lack the power of choice and personal understanding and accountability. And children want to be free from constraints just like adults, so part of education also is balancing those two things. So I covered a lot there. I hope you liked it. We got some new scenery out here. It looks pretty good. And yeah, that's some of my initial thoughts on education. I'm going to make a workout video after this. And then probably talk more in depth about education later, specifically about the Bible. But there's definitely a lot of things I can cover. And I also have a lot to learn myself because I don't know that much about Locke, Socrates, Albert Bandura, Richard Grove, Love One, Pleidians. A lot of good teachers out there, and I certainly would love to learn more about how to be a good teacher and how to be an effective communicator. So yeah, that's all I got. And I hope you enjoyed this. And yeah.